I am Cassidy Brenner, a 31 years old woman. I'm an interior designer in Portland, Oregon, and I thought my mother's inheritance would help me build the life I'd been too careful to dream about. What my sister did with that money with me changed everything. The first time I realized something was wrong, I was standing in line at the bank with a check clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles had turned white. It was raining outside, that soft, constant Portland drizzle that seeps into your hair and your bones and makes the whole world feel a little washed out. I remember looking at my reflection in the glass door as it slid open for me, hair damp, breath fogging the collar of my thrifted wool coat, my heart hammering like it always did when money was involved. Mom had been gone 6 months by then. 6 months of sorting boxes in the little house she'd left me and Lindsay, 6 months of waking up to my sister's voice at all hours of the night, whispering big plans about what we'd do together. She'd sit on the edge of my bed, her perfume trailing hints of roses and expensive nights out, telling me how Mom would have wanted us to stick together, how we'd both been given this chance. She was right about one thing. I'd spent my entire 20s terrified to want too much. I rented small apartments. I bought furniture secondhand and refinished it myself. I worked overtime designing other people's dream homes while putting off my own, always telling myself later, when it's the right time. When Mom's lawyer called me with the final figures, $180,000 split in 2 separate accounts, it felt like permission, like I could finally breathe, do something just for me. I stood at that bank counter and watched the teller's polite smile stiffen when she typed in my account number. Her acrylic nails tapped the keys in a hesitant rhythm that made my stomach twist. "I'm sorry," she said too brightly. "It looks like there's been some large withdrawals recently." I laughed even though it came out wrong, thin and sharp. "No, that's not possible. I haven't touched that money yet." But she turned her screen so I could see. A series of withdrawals, each a chunk of flesh from the total. $10,000 here, $15,000 there. The largest, $40,000, had cleared just 3 days ago, all marked authorized transfer. My mouth went dry, my ears rang so loud I barely heard her say she could get the branch manager if I wanted to dispute it. But what was I going to say? There's been a mistake. My sister wouldn't do this. Except under all that rising panic, a cold part of me already knew. I left the bank in a haze, the check still folded in my coat pocket like a dead thing. Outside, I fumbled with my phone in the rain until I found Lindsay's name in my contacts. She picked up on the third ring, her voice sweet and breezy, the same voice she'd used to talk our way into VIP lines when we were 19 and broke. "Hey Cass, what's up?" I couldn't feel my hands. "Did you touch my account?" Silence just for a beat, but enough for the truth to slip through. "Cass, calm down, okay? Don't freak out. I was going to talk to you about it tonight." "About what, Lindsay?" My voice cracked so badly I had to cover my mouth to keep from yelling in the middle of the sidewalk. Rain dripped down my sleeves, cold against my skin. "Where's the money?" She sighed like I was being unreasonable for wanting to know where my inheritance had gone. "It's not gone, okay? God, you always do this. You never trust me. I invested it." Invested, the word tasted like poison. In the brand, Cass, the new line, you know how much these launches cost, the travel, the styling, the content team. I've got meetings lined up. We're gonna double it back easy. I couldn't breathe. People walked past me, umbrellas colliding, shoes splashing through puddles. I felt like I was underwater, watching my life from the wrong side of the glass. "You didn't ask me," I whispered. It sounded pathetic even to my own ears. "It was time sensitive," she snapped. "You were dragging your feet. You always overthink everything. I knew you'd panic, so I just did what needed to be done for us, Cass." For us, the same line she'd used when we were kids and she'd convinced me to sneak out after curfew. The same line she'd used when she'd borrowed my car in college and brought it back with a dent the size of a cantaloupe in the bumper. Only this time it wasn't my car, it wasn't my curfew, it was my life. When I got home that night, the house was cold and smelled like the peppermint candles Mom used to love. I stood in the hallway for a long time, coat dripping on the hardwood, keys still in my hand. Luna, my old tabby, wound herself around my ankles, purring like she didn't know the floor had just fallen out from under me. Lindsay showed up half an hour later, all bright lipstick and big sister charm, arms full of takeout containers like she was coming to soothe me instead of confess. Cass, come on, don't be dramatic, let's just sit, I'll show you the plan. She spread it all out on the kitchen table, color-coded spreadsheets, mock-ups for her influencer brand's new site, lists of vendors and photographers. She kept using we, her voice dripping sugar over everything she'd done. I sat across from her in the same chair Mom used to keep pulled out for surprise visitors. I stared at the numbers on the page, trying to see what she saw, some glittering future where $180,000 was just a down payment on our sisterly empire. But all I could see was rent, groceries, the deposit on the tiny studio I'd dreamed of opening on Hawthorne Boulevard, the trips I'd promised myself, Paris in spring, Kyoto in fall, all those laters I'd sacrificed for the responsible version of me who always waited her turn. Lindsay leaned forward, her bracelets jingling. Cass, it's going to be fine, better than fine. Once we hit our first 6 figures in sales, we'll pay you back and then some. You'll thank me. I opened my mouth, closed it, looked at her face, the face I'd trusted to be my compass when Mom got sick, when I didn't know how to live without someone telling me I was doing it right. You stole from me, I said, my voice breaking like thin ice under heavy boots. She flinched just for a heartbeat, then her mouth twisted into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. God, you're so dramatic. I didn't steal anything. I'm building something for both of us. You just can't see it yet. She gathered up her folders like a teacher dismissing a student who'd failed the lesson, kissed me on the forehead like she used to when we were kids playing house. She smelled like rose water and expensive shampoo, the scent of a life that had never belonged to both of us, no matter how many times she said it did. When the door shut behind her, I sat alone in that too-quiet kitchen, Luna's warm fur pressed against my shin, and felt the first ember of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Anger. A tiny, stubborn flame that whispered, you can't let her do this to you again. Outside, the rain drummed steady against the window. I closed my eyes and let it drown out the sound of her promises echoing through the hallways she'd emptied of everything I thought was safe. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Mom's old armchair by the window, watching the streetlights flicker through the rain. Luna curled on the armrest beside me, her soft rumble the only heartbeat that didn't hurt to hear. At 3 in the morning, I made coffee I didn't drink. I opened Lindsay's spreadsheets again, the ones she'd spread across my kitchen table like gospel. Her perfect brand deck, her vague timelines, her fake confidence scrawled in blue ink on the margins. Projected ROI 200%. I couldn't stop staring at the numbers that didn't add up. If I tried to present a client plan this half-baked, they'd have laughed me out of their living rooms. But Lindsay had turned it into a gospel, so pretty even I had almost wanted to believe it. By dawn, my anger was a raw thing thrumming under my skin, sharper than panic, harder than grief. Grief I understood, grief had shape, gravity, and edge that dulled with time. But betrayal like this had a heartbeat that wouldn't quit, and I didn't know what to do with it. I typed an email to Peter Tommyson, an old college friend who'd done my taxes for free when I was too broke to afford a real CPA. He'd gone into small business law. Back then, I'd laughed that I'd never need him for anything big. I'm too careful, I'd told him once. I'm not the risky sister. When he called me back that same afternoon, his voice was gentle, too gentle, like he already knew there'd be no easy fix. Cassidy, do you have any paper trail? Anything proving you didn't authorize those transfers? I turned in my desk chair, looking at the stacks Lindsay had left, handwritten notes that didn't say, can I use your money? Just lines like we'll win this quarter and big shoots in LA and need more cash flow. Nothing explicit. Nothing she hadn't framed as us. I never signed anything, I said, my mouth dry. No contract. She had my password, she needed it to wire me her share of the bills when Mom died. Peter let out a slow breath. Cass, she could argue, implied consent. Family money, shared inheritance, no written agreements. It's not impossible to challenge her, but it's going to be ugly. Ugly? I closed my eyes and pictured Lindsay's face the night before, that bright, hard smile. The way she'd kissed my forehead like she was blessing me for my own good. Is it worth it? I asked, and the question felt like pressing on a bruise. Peter didn't say yes, he didn't say no, he said, do you want it back? The thing no one tells you about betrayal is how lonely it makes you. I'd spent my whole life telling people my sister was my best friend, my mirror, my partner in crime. She was the one who fought off the older kids who teased me in middle school, the one who talked me through my first heartbreak. She was the one who found me on the bathroom floor when I thought Mom wasn't going to wake up again. Who was I without her? Who was I if I turned her name into an enemy in a courtroom? I didn't tell anyone at first, not even Maddie, who'd always taken my side in family squabbles when we were kids. Not our Aunt Celia, who called once a week to ask how I was holding up after Mom. I didn't want the pity. I didn't want the polite silence when I said Lindsay's name. I didn't want the 1,000 tiny questions I didn't know how to answer. So I got quiet. I worked late. I watched YouTube videos about small claims procedures and fraud claims and bank statement audits until my eyes stung. I took Luna on long walks in the drizzle, replaying old conversations in my head like broken records. A week later, Lindsay invited me to her place. A downtown loft she'd always bragged was leased under my business credit. I remember pausing in front of the heavy glass doors, pressing my palms to my jeans to hide the sweat. I could have said no, but I wanted to see her eyes when she tried to spin it again. Her place smelled like vanilla candles and dry-cleaned cashmere. There were shopping bags stacked by the entry table, branded boutiques, thick ribbon handles, the kind of purchases that didn't look like desperate survival but victory laps. She hugged me like nothing had happened. Her arms were soft, her perfume cloying. I stood stiff while she talked about the upcoming soft launch, the influencer collabs, the marketing push. Her voice danced quicksilver bright, sliding over every hard question I wanted to ask. "Cass, you worry too much," she said, pouring me wine I didn't want. "You know me, I always land on my feet." I set the glass down untouched. My hands trembled just enough that I curled them into fists in my lap. "I talked to a lawyer," I said. Her smile froze, just a flicker, a ripple under the calm surface. Then it snapped back into place. "God, Cass, you're going to drag family into this? You want strangers crawling through our accounts, our history?" She laughed, but it was brittle. "It'll cost you more than you'll ever get back." She was right, probably. Peter had warned me she'd spin it as a loan, she'd drag it out. She'd drain me with filings and countersuits and crocodile tears until I gave up. But then she said something that flipped the switch inside me for good. She leaned forward, her mouth so close I could smell the wine on her breath. "You'd really do that to me, to Mom's memory." That was it, the blade, the twist. She didn't even say our mom. She said Mom's memory, like she owned the grief more than me. Like my mourning was leverage she could spend the way she spent everything else I'd given her. I stood up so fast the wine sloshed onto her perfect white tablecloth. I didn't care. "I'm getting my money back, Lindsay," I said. My voice didn't even shake. It felt cold, cleaner than any anger I'd ever carried. "And I'm going to do it the right way, so you can't pretend it never happened." Her smile cracked, but she let it sit there like a broken mask. "You think people will side with you, against me? You think you'll look like the hero in this?" I didn't answer. I didn't owe her an answer. I left her there, barefoot in her luxury loft, clutching her wine glass like it was a trophy she'd earned. That night, back in my apartment, I packed up the last boxes of Mom's things I'd been avoiding. Photos, old recipes, her battered wind chime. I hung that chime by my bedroom window, the soft clatter a promise that I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for the version of me who'd believed my sister would always protect me. I was doing it for the version of me who didn't want to be careful anymore. Not about love, not about money, not about who deserved to sit at my kitchen table. I was doing it for the truth. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the wind chime knocking softly against the window frame, a gentle clink that made my chest tighten. For a second, half asleep, I expected to hear Mom's footsteps in the hallway, the clatter of her old kettle on the stove. But the apartment stayed still, except for Luna pressing her nose to my cheek, insistent that I get up and feed her before the sun burned through the gray clouds outside. I moved through my morning like I was moving through someone else's house. Coffee I barely tasted. Emails I answered without reading twice. My phone sat on the counter, Peter's number pinned to the top of my contacts, like a lifeline I kept grabbing but couldn't quite hold on to. By noon, I had an appointment at his office downtown. He'd booked a small glass conference room for us, neutral carpet, a potted fern wilting in the corner, the hush of other people's secrets seeping through the thin walls. He slid a single manila folder across the table toward me. "Cass, I need you to be clear about this," he said, leaning back with that steady lawyer calm eye. once found comforting and now clung to like a raft. This is going to be long, she's going to fight it. She'll use your family, your friends, your history to make you question yourself. It's textbook, and she'll be good at it. I flipped the folder open. Inside, screenshots of Lindsay's withdrawals, copies of my original account paperwork, a rough timeline Peter had pieced together from the bank's statements. My life, my future, reduced to gray lines and transaction codes. I want to do it anyway, I said before I could lose my nerve. He nodded once like he'd expected nothing else. All right then, first we file a demand letter. If she ignores it, and I'm guessing she will, we escalate. Civil court. Possible asset freeze depending on how well she's hidden the funds. I stared down at Lindsay's name in bold on the pages. Lindsay Elise Brenner, my sister, my first protector, the girl who once climbed a neighbor's fence to rescue my favorite stuffed bear when I left it outside overnight. I felt the memory twist in my ribs, hot and sharp, but it didn't stop me from picking up the pen Peter offered me. Let's do it, I said. My voice didn't crack this time. Back home, the demand letter felt like a bomb ticking in my purse. I made dinner I barely tasted. I let Luna bat at the envelope, her paw tapping the edge like she could sense it carried something that would change everything. I waited 3 days before Lindsay called. She didn't text. She did DM me her usual sweet nonsense. She called old school like it was still 2010 and we were arguing over whose turn it was to do Mom's grocery run. When I saw her name flash on my screen, my stomach flipped. I answered anyway. Cassidy, her voice was tight, clipped, none of the honey she'd poured over every lie before. You actually got a lawyer. I didn't say yes, I didn't say you made me. I stayed quiet the way Peter told me to. You're overreacting, she hissed. It's our money. It was always going to come back to you, I told you that. I want it back now, I said, my heart thudding so hard I pressed my palm to my chest like I could keep it from rattling out. You're going to humiliate me, you know that, right? Once this is public, they'll pick it apart, they'll twist it. You think you'll come out of this clean? There it was, the threat coiled tight in her tone. She'd drag me through the mud if she had to. I'd known it was coming, but hearing it still scraped raw against my ribs. I'm not hiding anymore, Lindsay, I said. My voice felt like gravel in my throat, but I kept going. You did this, you fix it, or I will. For a second, she went quiet. I pictured her standing in that loft she loved so much, the filtered light, the sleek countertops, the closet that probably still smelled like fresh leather and new silk. I pictured her weighing which face to wear next. When she spoke again, her voice was syrupy sweet. Cass, come on, we can fix this together. Come over tomorrow, we'll sort it out, just us, like sisters. I almost laughed. She sounded exactly like she did when we were 12, sneaking out to TP the neighbor's house after he yelled at us for biking on his lawn. Come on, Cass, we won't get caught. Except we always did, and I always took the blame. Send any offer through Peter, I said, and then I hung up. My hand shook so badly I had to brace it on the kitchen counter. Luna wound herself around my ankles, her purr vibrating through my bones like an echo of the life I was clawing back inch by inch. A week later, Peter called with Lindsay's offer. I put him on speaker, sat cross-legged on my bed, the wind chime tapping against the window behind me. She's offering to pay back 40 grand now, he said. I could hear the skepticism in his voice, the careful lawyer calm that told me exactly what he thought of it. The rest, once her next launch clears profit, no redeeming schedule. I laughed, a little sound of startled Luna off the computer. So, nothing, basically. Pretty much, Peter hesitated. Cass, this is where you decide how far you want to push. If you reject this, you'll have it in court. Public filing executive and followers. Good, I said. The word surprised both of us. I think it didn't come from my throat, it came from somewhere deep, somewhere there. Part of me that remembered my mother's voice, the conceit, the thoughtfulness, and all of that. Maybe so, but I had me too, and I was done choosing Lindsay over the time. I didn't tell anyone about the court news first. Not mad at me, I'm sorry. I let the days trickle past while Peter drafted motions and filed statements of claim. I watched the city slip from late autumn into the bleak chill of an early winter. Some days I wondered if Lindsay even felt the cold the way I did, if her world ever froze enough to make her see she couldn't charm her way out of this one. 2 nights before our first hearing, I sat on my floor with Luna curled against my thigh. I spread out the photos from our childhood, the ones I hadn't touched since Mom's funeral. Lindsay grinning in cheap plastic sunglasses, her arm thrown around my shoulders. The two of us, knee-deep in ocean foam on Cannon Beach, screaming with laughter while Dad stood just out of frame. I should have burned them. Part of me wanted to. But another part knew I needed the proof that once, before the lies and the debt and the handbags and the constant knowing more, there was a time I could believe she loved me the way I loved her. I left them spread out on the rug all night. Little ghosts reminding me why I'd fight, not because I hated her, but because I finally loved myself enough to stop letting her take. When I crawled into bed, the wind chime rattled in the sharp November gust. Luna lifted her head, blinked at me, then pressed her warm weight back into my ribs. I lay there listening to the hollow clatter, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost and everything I was about to take back. The morning of the first hearing, I woke up before the alarm. For a few seconds, I lay in the half-dark of my bedroom, listening to the wind chime tap gently against the glass. The sky outside was still that muddy Portland gray, the kind that makes the whole city feel half awake even when the sun's supposed to be up. I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling the cold floor under my bare feet, and for a moment I let myself imagine Mom sitting across from me like she used to, bathrobe cinched tight, her old chipped mug in her hands. I pictured her eyes soft but sharp at the edges, the way they got when Lindsay and I fought over stupid things. "Do what's right, Cass," she'd say. "Not do what's easy, never that." When I finally moved, Luna was already waiting by the door, tail flicking like she could sense I needed her silent blessing to step out into the mess. Peter met me on the courthouse steps. He looked like every lawyer in every movie, neat coat, tie just slightly loose at the throat, eyes already scanning the building behind me as if Lindsay might leap out and spin her story for the cameras that hadn't even arrived yet. He handed me a to-go cup, too hot against my palm. I held it like a shield while we stood there in the chill. "You ready?" he asked. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, a line of mismatched chairs, the stale hum of air vents overhead. It didn't look like the place where my world would split open and be rearranged in front of strangers. But maybe that was the point. Betrayal never announced itself with grandeur. It crawled in quiet hallways and stale carpet. Lindsay arrived 10 minutes late, of course, hair perfect, coat cinched tight around her tiny waist, heels clicking like applause across the linoleum. She didn't look at me right away. She looked at Peter, then at the judge's bench, then at the clock. Only when she sat down did she flick her eyes toward mine, a flash of something I couldn't name. Pity, fury, fear, I didn't know anymore. Her lawyer was a man I'd never met, smooth voice, expensive watch, smile that didn't reach his eyes. He shook Peter's hand too hard, a small, silent flex. I wondered if Lindsay paid him with the last scraps of what she hadn't blown on handbags and photo shoots. Or maybe she promised him exposure, her favorite currency. When the judge called my name, my mouth went dry. Peter's hand on my shoulder steadied me just enough. I stood. I spoke. I told them how Mom's account had been split equally. How my sister and I had always done everything together until we didn't. How the transfers had drained what I'd built for my future before I'd even had a chance to touch it. I didn't cry. I kept my voice flat, steady, even when I caught Lindsay's smirk in the corner of my eye, the way she leaned back in her chair like she was watching bad TV. Her lawyer painted her as the savior, the visionary who'd leveraged a dormant asset to benefit both parties. He used words like strategic partnership and family agreement. He pulled out copies of old texts, screenshots of messages where I'd typed "sure, use what you need" when she asked for help covering Mom's hospice bills. He twisted them until they became permission slips for everything that came next. For a heartbeat, doubt flickered behind my ribs, hot, nauseating. Did I say yes without saying it? Did I let her? But then Peter stood, calm and precise, unraveling the half-truth stitch by stitch. He pointed out the dates, the big withdrawals after Mom's funeral, the sudden splurge that didn't match hospice receipts. He laid out Lindsay's brand expenses like broken glass for everyone to see. First-class flights, stylists, the rented cars she flaunted as gifts. I watched Lindsay's face stay frozen in that same polite mask, the tiny twitch of her jaw the only betrayal of her calm. I wondered if she felt it then, the slow slip of her perfect version of the story cracking under the cheap lights. Afterward, in the hallway, she cornered me by the vending machines. Peter stayed back, giving us a bubble of space he pretended not to watch. Lindsay smelled like vanilla and nerves. "Are you proud of this?" she hissed, her voice a blade pressed just under my ribs. "Dragging me through this circus, do you know how I look right now?" I didn't flinch, like someone who spent what wasn't theirs. Her laugh was dry, brittle. "God, you always were so righteous, Cass, so boring. You could have been part of it, but you always wanted to be a martyr instead." I wanted to scream at her, shake her. "Do you hear yourself?" But all I did was lean in close enough to see the flecks of mascara clinging to her lashes. "I wanted you to be my sister," I whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." Her eyes flickered, and for a heartbeat, there it was. Regret. Or maybe just the ghost of the girl I used to believe in. But it vanished as quick as it came. She straightened, flipped her hair back, put her mask on like a fresh coat of lipstick. "This isn't over," she said. And then she was gone, heels clacking down the sterile hallway. Outside, Peter handed me a bottle of water and a small nod of approval. "You did good in there." "It doesn't feel good," I said. He didn't argue. He just held the door while I stepped out into the raw bite of Portland's early winter. The air felt cleaner than the courtroom, but it didn't wash off the ache crawling under my skin. That night back home, I found one of Mom's old notebooks tucked behind a stack of fabric swatches in my closet, lists of chores, old grocery lists, half-finished recipes in her cramped cursive. At the back, folded so many times it nearly fell apart, was a note I'd written her years ago, when Lindsay and I had fought over some long-forgotten boyfriend. "I'm sorry, I'll fix it, I'll make it right, I promise." I traced the letters with my fingertip until the paper grew damp from my breath. I wondered if Mom would forgive me for keeping that promise one last time, not for Lindsay's sake, but for my own. Outside my window, the wind chime knocked gently, each soft clang another heartbeat in the quiet apartment where I was finally learning how to stand alone. The days after that first hearing blurred into each other like rain streaking down my bedroom window. Court filings, emails from Peter, more copies of bank statements and receipts I hadn't even known existed. I spent hours at my kitchen table, the same table Lindsay had once claimed with her color-coded brand plans, highlighting every transaction that didn't belong to me. Sometimes I found myself staring at the numbers so long they stopped meaning anything, just shapes on a page that used to be my future. At night, I lay awake listening to the wind chime rattle against the glass. It had become my strange comfort, the small reminder that some things stay honest no matter how rough the weather gets. Some nights I wanted to take it down and bury it in a box with the photos of Lindsay and me as kids, all those fake forever promises that no longer had a place on my wall. But I didn't. Maybe I needed the sound, a promise that truth, even when it hurts, doesn't break the way lies do. Lindsay didn't call after that hallway fight. She didn't text either. Instead, she took it public exactly like Peter said she would. It started as a single post on her influencer page. A softly lit video, Lindsay in a gray sweatshirt, hair scraped into a messy bun, face bare except for perfectly smeared mascara that made her eyes look heartbreakingly wide. Her caption read, "Family is complicated. Betrayal hurts. But I know the truth always comes out." No names, no details, just bait for sympathy. The comments flooded in within hours, a tidal wave of strangers typing words that made my hands shake when I read them in bed that night. "Stay strong, girl. Blood is thicker than money. Your sister must be so jealous." They called her brave. They called me toxic without knowing my name. When I showed Peter, he barely lifted an eyebrow. "She wants you to flinch," he said. "Don't." But part of me wanted to scream at every stranger defending her. "Come sit at my kitchen table. Open my bank app. Look me in the eyes while I show you the receipts." Of course, that's not how it works. The internet believes what it wants to believe. And Lindsay had always been so very good at giving them something beautiful to look at. The next hearing came faster than I was ready for. Peter called it the easy part, just procedural, paperwork, a few statements on record. But there was nothing easy about standing 6 feet from my sister while she avoided my eyes like I was a ghost she'd hoped to bury. When it was my turn to speak, I told the same story again. Each time I did, it felt a little less like telling and a little more like cutting open a wound that refused to scab over. Afterward, Peter talked with her lawyer about possible settlement figures in hushed voices near the clerk's counter. Lindsay drifted closer to me, like she couldn't help herself. Her perfume hit me first, soft roses and expensive vanilla that reminded me of the nights we'd sit cross-legged on my twin bed as teenagers, whispering secrets until Mom tapped on the door to tell us to sleep. "You really think you'll win?" she murmured under her breath. I didn't answer her. I didn't trust myself to open my mouth without spitting out every ugly truth I'd held back for years. Her smile flickered. "I'll just tell them you always said yes. You know that, right? You never said no." And there it was, the truth behind her truth. The line she'd used my entire life. If you didn't say no, you meant yes. If you didn't fight back, it was your fault. I turned to face her. For the first time since I filed the claim, I really looked at her, the hairline crack in her lip gloss, the tiny wrinkle between her brows that no filter could erase, the shimmer of sweat at her hairline she probably thought no one could see. "You're right," I said, and my voice surprised us both, quiet, calm, flat as stone. "I should have said no a long time ago, but I'm saying it now." She flinched just for a second. Then she turned away, lips pressed tight, spine straight like a statue carved out of spite. Outside, Peter and I walked in silence to a tiny cafe across from the courthouse. I wrapped my hands around a mug of tea I barely drank while he tapped out emails to file another motion. When he paused, he asked, "Cass, you doing okay?" I wanted to lie, but what was the point? Not really. He nodded once, the kind of nod that said he'd expected nothing else. "It'll get worse before it gets better." I almost laughed. The words were too small for the roar in my chest. Worse than watching strangers praise Lindsay for stealing from me. Worse than cutting my own sister off like she was a disease eating my life from the inside out. "Good," I said, the words scraping my throat raw. "Let it." That night back home, I opened my laptop and clicked on Lindsay's latest video. She was crying again, tears catching the corners of her false lashes, soft piano music humming under her whispery voice. People always want to tear down what they don't understand. But I'm staying strong for you guys. I closed the tab. I didn't need to see the comments this time. I knew what they'd say. I knew the followers she'd bought and the followers she'd fooled would all clap for her performance. In my bedroom, I dragged the old cardboard box out from under my bed, the one I'd packed with Mom's wind chimes and recipes and scraps of our childhood. At the very bottom, folded so many times it felt like tissue, was an old Polaroid. Lindsay at 17, me at 15, both of us in cheap dollar store tiaras, plastic wands in our hands, crowns crooked as our smiles. I turned the photo over. On the back, in Mom's looping hand, "My girls always stick together." I held that picture until my fingers cramped. Then I set it on the windowsill right next to the wind chime and told myself the truth I'd been avoiding for too long. Sometimes the only way to keep a promise is to break the part of it that's killing you. Outside, the rain tapped steady on the glass while Luna curled herself against my thigh, purring like a soft drumbeat under my ribs. I was ready for the storm Lindsay didn't know I could survive. The days turned into weeks. The hearings kept coming, short, sharp slices of my life rearranged under fluorescent lights and stale carpet. Every time I walked through the courthouse doors, my heartbeat settled a little steadier in my chest. Not calm, never that, but steadier. The kind of steady that comes from saying no to the thing that's fed off you for too long. Lindsay's lawyer kept throwing out settlement offers, each more insulting than the last. 45 grand and a public apology. 60 grand and she keeps the brand. 100 grand but you sign an NDA. Every time Peter laid a new number in front of me, I saw Lindsay's face the night she poured wine she knew I wouldn't drink, the pity in her voice when she said I'd never understand how big she could be. I tore up each offer in my head before Peter even finished reading the fine print. Some nights Maddie called, my oldest friend from high school, the one who'd sat with me after Mom's funeral while Lindsay was off taking meetings that turned out to be shopping trips and spa days in LA. I'd kept it from Maddie at first, ashamed of the mess, of how stupid I felt for letting my own sister use my grief as a debit card. But secrets rot when you keep them alone too long. So one night, I told her everything, sitting on my kitchen floor, phone on speaker, Luna curled between my ankles like she was stitching my pieces back together one purr at a time. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. Not pity, not polite horror, just Maddie's breath catching once, sharp and furious. "That bitch," she said finally, her voice so calm it made me laugh and then cry, the kind of wet, shaking laugh that left me gasping. You can say it again, I whispered. That bitch, she repeated, and we both sat there in our separate apartments, two grown women who used to sneak cheap wine into dorm parties, letting the ugly truth hang between us like a prayer. The next hearing was longer than the rest. Cross-examination, Lindsay on the stand. Her lawyer coached her well, soft voice, downcast eyes, hands folded like she was the injured party, the dreamer torn apart by her bitter sister's jealousy. But Peter had taught me too. Every lie she wrapped in silk, he picked apart thread by thread. Did you ask Cassidy for written consent to use these funds? Did you inform her how much you withdrawn after January? Can you provide proof that these purchases, he lifted an exhibit with her shopping bags circled in red, were business-related? And always Lindsay's voice, that bright, brittle edge when the mask slipped for half a second. Cass always knew, Cass always said yes, Cass never stopped me. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't look at her. I looked at the judge. I looked at the dull gray carpet. I looked at the truth I'd rehearsed so many nights in my head I could say it without trembling. No, I didn't say yes. I didn't know the money was gone until it was too late, and if I'd known, I would have said no. Simple, true, nothing fancy to spin. When it was over, Lindsay wouldn't look at me. She stood by the courthouse door, arms crossed, phone pressed to her ear like a shield. I caught her eye for half a second, just enough to see the tight line of her jaw, the way her fingers tapped restlessly against the case. The calm that had once made her so dangerous was slipping. I could feel it like a storm brewing under the brittle mask. Afterward, I stopped by Mom's old house, the place we'd grown up, now empty and half-gutted. The realtor kept calling me, pushing for a quick sale, but I couldn't bring myself to sign the final papers yet. Something about that hollow echo in the hallway, the dust dancing in the late afternoon sun, made me feel like Mom was still there, not to forgive Lindsay, but to forgive me for letting it get this far. I stood in my old bedroom, the wallpaper peeling in one corner, the closet door half off its hinge. I could almost see us as kids, Lindsay's laughter as she braided my hair too tight, her bossy voice telling me which dress to wear for the pretend talent shows we'd forced Dad to judge from the hallway. I wanted to hate her then, the memory of her smile, the fierce way she'd once loved me when we were both too young to understand what people do when they're hungry for more than you can give. But hate was too easy, too cheap. I didn't hate her. I pitied her, and that pity felt like a cleaner blade than rage. I stayed there until the sun dipped behind the neighbors' rooftops. When I left, I locked the door behind me, for the first time not out of fear someone might break in, but because I needed to know no one could break me through that house anymore. A week later, Peter called. She wants to settle again, he said, his tone so dry it almost made me smile. How much this time? Full amount plus legal fees. But I could hear him flipping through papers, the soft rasp of his finger dragging along the pages. She wants a confidentiality clause. You drop the suit, no public statement, no media, no online mention. She wipes the deck quietly. You get your money back. I pressed the phone to my cheek, watching Luna chase a speck of dust across the hardwood. For a second, I let myself imagine it, the easy out. The check in my account. The end of the emails, the hearings, the strain I saw in my reflection every morning. But then I saw her again, Lindsay in that loft, smirking over her untouched wine, daring me to look weak one last time. No, I said, my voice didn't shake. No NDA, she pays in full publicly or we keep going. Peter let out a slow breath, the smallest laugh buried at the edge. Good girl. I hung up, stood by the window, and pressed my palm against the cold glass. Outside, the first real snow of winter had started to fall, slow, quiet flakes drifting under the streetlight. Luna pawed at the window like she could catch each one before it melted. For the first time in months, I let myself believe I could win, not just the money, but the story, the truth, the right to stand in the wreckage and say, she didn't break me, not really. And when the wind chime knocked softly behind my head, I didn't flinch at all. The day after I turned down Lindsay's hush settlement, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Peter texted updates every few hours, new filings, fresh demands, Lindsay's lawyer trying one last angle to scare me into silence. Each vibration felt like a little test, a ghost tapping my shoulder. Are you sure? Are you really ready to see this through? I was, or at least I was as ready as I'd ever be. By now, the hate messages had started trickling into my DMs. Not many, just enough to remind me that the internet doesn't care about receipts, only stories. Some influencer gossip account had pieced together enough clues from Lindsay's sob videos to sniff out my name. The comment section turned me into a villain overnight, sister from hell, bitter witch, jealous loser. At first, I wanted to defend myself. I drafted 1,000 posts in my head, screenshots of bank statements, her fake invoices, her designer shopping sprees paid for with my savings. But every time I hovered over the post button, my throat went tight. I could scream the truth into a hurricane and still lose my voice before the wind carried it anywhere useful. So I didn't post, I waited. I let the court filings do what my words never could, stand on their own, cold and undeniable. It's funny, the things you notice when the noise gets too loud to ignore. I started sleeping better once I stopped checking my notifications. My appetite crawled back, small but steady. I cooked myself real food again, not just boxed noodles or takeout eaten cold over the sink. I even let Maddie drag me out to a coffee shop on Alberta Street one gray Thursday afternoon. She shoved her phone in my face the second we sat down. "You seen this?" she said, her eyes dancing with something between disbelief and vindication. I took her phone. On the screen, Lindsay's brand account was trending, but not the way she'd wanted. Someone had leaked the real numbers, an ex-collaborator maybe, a disgruntled photographer, someone who'd finally had enough of the illusions. The receipts were all there, invoices unpaid, fake gifting deals Lindsay bragged about that never existed, screenshots of her promising payouts that never came. The comments were a feeding frenzy, the same people who'd called her brave now calling her fraud. For a second, the vindication should have tasted sweet. Instead, it sat heavy in my mouth, a metallic tang that reminded me how quickly strangers will crown you or crucify you, depending on which version of the truth looks prettier on their screens. Maddie watched my face carefully. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than I expected. "You okay?" I shrugged, "I don't know." And that was the truth. I didn't know how to feel. I'd spent so long bracing for the world to believe her that now, when it started believing me by accident, I didn't know where to put the anger I'd carried like armor for months. That night, I stayed up late. I pulled out the Polaroids again, the same ones from Mom's old house, edges curling from too many nights pressed under my pillow. Lindsay in her dollar store tiara, me with my cheeks pink from laughing too hard. I didn't hate that version of us. I missed her, the sister who snuck me cookies when Mom grounded me, who swore up and down we'd run away to LA someday and be famous just for being ourselves. Maybe that's what hurt the most. She'd gotten her wish. She was famous, sort of, just not for the reasons she dreamed. The next court date was a formality, final arguments before the judge ruled whether we'd settle or push to a full trial. I sat outside the courtroom with Peter, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of vending machine coffee that tasted like warm dirt. Lindsay was late again. When she finally showed, she looked thinner than the last time, makeup perfect, but skin stretched too tight across her cheekbones. She didn't meet my eyes, not once. Inside, her lawyer did what he was paid to do, spun the story one last time. Family misunderstanding, bad communication. Cassidy always knew, Cassidy always benefited. Cassidy wants to punish success she couldn't have herself. When Peter stood, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He laid out the dates, the missing invoices, the chain of withdrawals lined up like dominoes. He ended with one line I'll never forget. "My client isn't punishing success, Your Honor. She's protecting herself from theft, even when that theft wears a family name." Lindsay flinched at that, the word theft landing in the stale courtroom air like a slap neither of us could take back. We didn't talk afterward. She brushed past me in the hallway, eyes on her phone like I didn't exist. For a second, I almost reached out, an old, useless reflex to fix what was broken between us. But I let her pass. I stood there while Peter signed paperwork with the clerk, my arms crossed tight over my chest, the empty coffee cup crushed in my fist. When I got home that night, there was a box on my porch, no note, no sender's name. Inside, one of Lindsay's old luxury handbags, the first one she'd bought with my money. I remembered the receipt, $6,800 for a piece of leather she'd carried exactly twice before bragging she was too big for last season's styles. I sat on my living room floor, the bag in my lap. Luna batted at the tissue paper like it was a new toy. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed on my shoulders so hard I thought I might fold. The fights, the hearings, the nights staring at my bank app wondering if I'd ever feel safe with my own money again. Then I stood up. I carried that bag straight to the trash chute at the end of my hall. I didn't even pause to second guess it. It landed in the metal bin below with a dull, hollow thunk that felt louder than any apology Lindsay had never given me. By the time I crawled into bed, the city outside my window was quiet, snow muffling the sounds of traffic, wind chime tapping softly like it knew I needed it to remind me I hadn't lost everything. Just the parts that were never really mine to keep. Luna pressed her warm weight into my ribs. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, Peter's name lighting up the screen. "We're close," he'd written, "she's cracking, hold steady." I slid the phone face down, turned my cheek into Luna's fur, and let the soft drift of her purr drown out every lie I'd ever believed about who my sister was and who I needed to be without her. The next few days felt like standing on a frozen lake, every step a question of whether the ice would hold. Peter kept me updated, short texts, late-night calls, her lawyer's stalling. "She's considering a full public statement. She might countersue for defamation, don't panic, it's noise." I didn't panic, I couldn't. It was like something inside me had finally burned too hot for fear to stick anymore. The old version of me, the girl who used to swallow her voice to keep Lindsay happy, she was gone. I missed her some nights, the softness in her, the naive hope. But I didn't grieve her. She kept me warm when I needed her. Now I needed something sharper. On a gray Monday morning, Peter called and told me to come in. No preamble, just "you need to hear this from me," not an email. His office felt smaller than the last time, or maybe I'd just grown too big for the version of me who'd first sat in this chair, palms sweating, voice cracking when I asked if we even had a chance. Peter folded his hands, the skin around his knuckles raw from the winter cold. "They want final mediation, no trial. They're offering the full amount, principal, interest, your legal fees, all of it." My throat went tight and he exhaled through his nose, a lawyer's version of rolling his eyes. "Same condition as before, confidentiality. They want you to sign that you won't speak about any of this publicly. She'll pay, but only if you pretend it never happened." I stared at the tiny scratch on his conference table, a half-moon gouge in the cheap laminate where someone's pen must have slipped years ago. It looked like a crater, like proof that even polished surfaces break if you press hard enough. I thought about all the nights Lindsay and I had stayed up whispering under blankets about who we'd be when we were older. How we'd never be like mom's sisters, always fighting over inheritances and old furniture and grudges that turned holidays into minefields. "We'll always have each other," she'd promised, no matter what. I thought about her voice on the phone the first night I confronted her. "It's our money." The way she'd spat it like an accusation, like my biggest crime was wanting what was mine to begin with. I thought about the hate comments that would crawl out again if I told the world what she'd done. The DMs, the cheap gossip, the strangers who'd call me a monster for asking the truth to stand bare under the fluorescent courtroom lights. Then I looked Peter in the eye and asked, "What happens if I say no?" He didn't flinch. "We finish it. We go to trial, we call her bluff. Maybe she folds on the stand, maybe she does. Either way, it's public, all of it." My stomach lurched. I pictured Lindsay's face on some gossip site, her voice cracking as she tried to spin the spin one last time. I pictured Mom's old neighbors reading the headlines, Maddie's parents seeing our names linked forever to something ugly and sad. But then I pictured my bank account, the zero I'd stared at the week after Mom's funeral. The hollow ache of wondering how I'd pay rent while Lindsay flaunted new handbags on rooftops I wasn't invited to stand on anymore. More than that, I pictured my own face in the mirror, the one that had grown sharper, steadier, a little harder maybe, but never cold. I pictured her looking back at me and nodding. I sat back, my voice didn't shake. "No deal." Peter let out a breath I think he'd been holding since the day I first walked through his door. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Then we fight." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my living room floor with my laptop balanced on my knees. Luna kept pawing at the edge of the keyboard like she knew I was about to do something that couldn't be undone. I opened my notes app, typed one line, deleted it, typed it again. My sister spent $180,000 of my inheritance on handbags and flights and photo shoots. I'm not staying quiet anymore. I didn't post it, not yet, but I left it open on my screen like a loaded gun, just to remind myself what I was capable of if she pushed me 1 inch too far. By morning, Peter called again, Her lawyer wants another mediation. They're rattled casts they know you won't fold. I was pouring coffee I barely tasted. What do you think she'll do? Peter paused, the first real crack in his iron calm. Honestly, I think she'll pay up, quietly, without an NDA. She'll spin a sob story about taking accountability for her mismanagement. She'll blame an assistant, a boyfriend, anything but herself. I snorted into my mug. Classic. But, he said, and his voice sharpened, if she doesn't, you ready to do this in front of everyone? I thought about Lindsay's followers, about the gossip sites waiting to slap our faces next to words like fraud, family feud, blood feud. I thought about the box of Mom's old wind chimes still rattling outside my window. I thought about that old promise on the back of the Polaroid, my girls, always stick together. Sometimes the only way to keep a promise is to stand far enough away not to break it again. Yeah, I said, I'm ready. 2 days later, I woke up to an email from Peter. Full payment wired, no NDA, no spin, she folded. I stared at the email so long my coffee went cold in my hand. When I finally looked up, Luna was perched on the windowsill, paw batting at the glass where the morning sun cracked through Portland's usual gray. I should have felt triumphant, the check, the victory, the so-called justice, but all I felt was tired, not the bone-deep ache of losing, but the soft, strange relief of surviving. I forwarded the email to Maddie with no subject line. She called me 5 minutes later, her voice bright and ragged. You did it. Yeah, I said, my throat tight. I did. That night I stood by my window, phone in my hand. The notes app was still open, the line waiting. I could hit post. I could tell the world exactly what she'd done. But then I heard the wind chime knock once, twice, a soft warning. Some truths don't need an audience. Some victories don't need applause. I closed the app, set my phone down, let Luna crawl into my lap. Outside, the snow had started falling again, clean, quiet, honest in a way my sister never was. For the first time since Mom died, I felt free enough to let it land where it may. I thought getting the money back would feel like some bright, clean win, a line in the sand between before and after. But the day it hit my account, I just stared at the balance for so long the numbers blurred. No fireworks, no flood of relief, just a silent, almost anticlimactic knowing. It was mine again. I hadn't lost everything. But I hadn't really won the way people like to think either. When I called the bank to double-check, the hold music felt like an old friend, a sad little reminder of how many hours I'd spent begging them to freeze my accounts when the first charges hit. This time, when the agent read out my balance, her voice bright and professional, I almost laughed. It's real, I told myself, hanging up. It's done. Peter called that afternoon, mostly to remind me it wasn't quite over. There'll be closing paperwork, he said, his voice gentle in the way I think he knew I needed just this once. Tax filings, some forms for your insurance since we documented the fraud. After that, you're clear. I thanked him and meant it, but what I didn't say was that no amount of paperwork could clear the part of my heart that still felt bruised. Money comes back, trust doesn't. Lindsay didn't reach out. No calls, no apology, not even one last carefully crafted PR text. The only sign she'd even noticed her empire cracking was when I saw a photo of her pop up in a tagged post, not from her own feed, but from someone who still wanted to stand close to the fire, I guess. She was out at some rooftop party in LA, half smile frozen under cheap fairy lights, glass of something sparkling lifted high enough to say, look, I'm fine. It almost made me pity her, how quickly she'd pivoted to pretending nothing happened. Almost. Maddie came over the day after the wire cleared. She didn't say congratulations. She didn't bring wine or cake. She just let herself in with the spare key and found me on the couch, legs tucked under a blanket that still smelled like the stale anxiety I'd been sweating out for months. You know what we're gonna do, she said, plopping down beside me like she owned the place. I raised an eyebrow. What? We're gonna book you a vacation or a class or a tattoo, something stupid that says I exist outside of her drama. I laughed louder than I'd laughed in weeks. A tattoo. She shrugged, dead serious. I'll get one too, freedom in tiny cursive on my wrist. God, that's so basic, I said, still laughing. Basic is good, she shot back. Basic means you're alive, not starring in your sister's meltdown. We didn't book the trip that night, or get tattoos. Instead, we ordered Thai food and fell asleep on the couch halfway through an old movie we'd seen 100 times. And in the morning, when I woke up and found Maddie drooling on my shoulder, I realized that sometimes the softest, smallest things are what pull you back from the edge you didn't even know you'd been standing on. A week later, I went back to Mom's house for the last time. The realtor's sign was crooked in the front yard, a gust of cold wind rattling the chain against the post. I stood on the porch for a long time before I found the courage to unlock the door. Inside, it smelled like dust and old cedar. The living room was empty, echoes bouncing off the walls where our couch used to be. I ran my palm along the windowsill where Lindsay and I used to leave our Barbie dolls lined up like an audience for our endless, terrible living room dance recitals. I could almost hear Mom's voice drifting down the hallway. "Keep it down, girls," she'd call, never really meaning it. She loved the noise, the life, the proof that she'd made something messy and loud and real. I sat cross-legged on the carpet in my old bedroom, the one with the wallpaper we'd begged Mom to let us paint over when we thought we were too grown up for flowers. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle around me. For once, it didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a blessing. A reminder that the past can't touch you if you stop dragging it around like a corpse you owe something. When I left, I locked the door and slid the keys through the mail slot for the realtor to pick up. No ceremony, no tears, just done. Back in my apartment, I opened the laptop one more time. The note I'd written, the one about what Lindsay did, was still there, cursor blinking like it was daring me to hit post. I could have, part of me still wanted to, maybe part of me always would. But instead, I highlighted every word, hit delete, closed the lid. Sometimes you don't need revenge. Sometimes you just need to be the one person who knows the whole story and gets to walk away from it head high, heart intact, bank account full enough to build something new. That night, I curled up in bed with Luna pressed warm against my side, the wind chime tapping at my window in soft little bursts. I thought about Mom, about that last note she'd scribbled on the back of the Polaroid, "My girls always stick together." I whispered into the quiet, "We did, Mom, for as long as we could." Outside, the snow had melted, leaving the street wet and glistening under the porch light. Spring was coming, slowly, softly, unapologetically. For the first time in too long, so was I. 3 months after the settlement, I woke up before dawn and realized I hadn't dreamed about Lindsay in weeks. No more half-awake visions of her standing in my hallway with her phone in her hand, eyes wide and lip gloss cracking while she fed me another excuse. No more sleepless nights listening for her footsteps that never came. It felt like freedom in the simplest way, silence. Just Luna snoring at my feet, the wind chime tapping once like it was reminding me I'd kept my promise to myself if no one else. I'd moved the wind chime to my new place. Small, nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom walk-up with windows that faced east so I'd never miss sunrise if I didn't want to. No ghosts here. No echoes of old arguments or secrets buried under rotting floorboards. Just me, my cat, and a kitchen table where I ate real meals instead of grief. Maddie kept her word about the tattoo. She dragged me to a tiny studio off Belmont one Saturday morning, hungover and half-hyped on cold brew. We both left with the same word inked in tiny letters on our ribs, just under the line of where our bras hit. Steady. Not freedom, not forgiven, just steady. The word felt truer than anything else. Some days standing still is harder than running, harder than fighting, harder than screaming for everyone to know how wronged you've been. I didn't want to keep fighting, I just wanted steady, quiet mind. I didn't tell many people what really happened. When they asked, I said something vague: family, money, a misunderstanding, the usual polite lies we use to keep messy truths from staining new friendships. Peter warned me I could talk if I wanted. I'd won. No NDA, no gag order, no threat of a lawsuit to silence me. But I'd spent so long using my voice to defend myself that I wanted to see what would happen if I used it for something else instead. So I started writing, not posts or rants, but small things. Little essays about forgiveness that might never come, about the cost of keeping secrets, about how grief can turn a family into something unrecognizable if you're not careful. I didn't publish them. Not yet. But I printed them out and pinned them above my new desk, proof that I could build something honest out of all the mess Lindsay left behind. One Sunday, Maddie and I sat at that same coffee shop on Alberta, the same barista, the same drafty window. She'd gotten a promotion at work, and I'd finally used some of the settlement money to pay off every debt Mom left behind. No more collectors. No more interest eating me alive in the dark while my sister posed with handbags she'd bought in my name. Do you ever think about calling her? Maddie asked, stirring too much sugar into her iced latte. I didn't pretend not to know who her meant. Sometimes, I admitted, not because I want her back, just because I don't know, part of me wonders if she ever misses me. Maddie raised an eyebrow. She misses the part of you that let her get away with it. I laughed, yeah, probably. I thought about Lindsay sometimes, not with hate that burned out quick once the money came back, not with pity either, just this odd, soft ache for the versions of us who really did mean it when we swore always. We were kids. We didn't know then that sometimes always is the heaviest lie in the world. On the first warm day of spring, I drove out of the city, just me and Luna in her carrier crying at every bump in the road. I parked on the side of a winding trail and hiked until my thighs burned and my lungs reminded me I'd spent too many months stuck indoors living in my own head. At the overlook, I sat on a sun-warmed rock and dug out the last thing I'd kept from the old house, that Polaroid of me and Lindsay in our bent-up crowns. I held it up to the wind and said softly, like a blessing or maybe a dare, I hope you find something real someday. Then I let it go. The breeze caught it, slow at first, then faster, until the tiny rectangle danced away over the ridge, disappearing into the green and gold mess of trees below. I stood there until my legs hurt, the sun creeping up my neck, Luna crying in her crate like she wanted me to get back to the world she knew, and when I turned, I didn't feel lighter, I felt steadier. That was enough. Back at my apartment, I taped the wind chime to my new window. Let it sing when the rain comes. Let it remind me of Mom's voice, my girls always stick together. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. But me, I'm still here, and for the first time, my always belongs to me.